Welcome to the Parkinson's Project podcast. The Parkinson's Project seeks to erase the stigma associated with Parkinson's disease while empowering and inspiring those dealing with the affliction to live life to the fullest. The Parkinson's Project aspires to build an engaged, supportive community while examining the journey of living with Parkinson's disease through a positive, empowering perspective. Here is your host of the Parkinson's Project podcast, Tim McNiff.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 34 of the Parkinson's Project podcast. I'm your host, Tim McNiff, and you may be wondering, where the heck have you been lately? Well, the truth is, we've been going strong here at the Parkinson's Project podcast for almost 2 years without a break, and we just needed to take a few weeks to catch our collective breath. We had to put the brakes on, just kind of regroup a little bit, but now we are back. We caught our breath, we are fresh, we are refocused, and we're back determined to keep making connections and driving awareness around PD. So thank you for your patience and your support. And now we'll get back to introducing you to the people who are trying to get a handle on this darn thing. People like this week's guest, Dr. Annie Adix. Dr. Adix currently works as a senior physical therapist at Struthers Parkinson Center in Golden Valley, Minnesota. Now, we could spend a lot of time going through Annie's career and her accomplishments, but we do try to keep these episodes within 30 minutes. So instead, what we're going to do is try to weave her journey into our conversation, ultimately leading to why she is here today to talk to us. So if you would, please give a warm PPP welcome to Dr. Annie Adix, a specialist in the treatment of Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders at Struthers. This is where the crowd cheers and the warm welcome happens. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you for being here. Great to have you with us. And I just want to back up a little bit. We actually met. We were at the Peloton for Parkinson's event that we talked about in April, previewed it coming up here. And you and I met at that time and made a connection. And I just want to say thank you so much for agreeing to come and being a guest.
Thank you for asking. It's an honor and a privilege. And I hope I'm able to disseminate some information today that is worthwhile.
I know you will, but I'm going to start with the curveball, the thing that no one saw coming, because we had a pre-production conversation where I, the layman, was actually able to give you, the doctor, some medical advice to help you deal with the nagging problem that you had. What was going on and how are you doing?
Ladies and gentlemen, Tim McNiff saved my life. I have been... so if this whole journalism thing doesn't work out for you, I think you still have a future. I have had a deformity in my peroneus longus tendon. For those of you who don't know where that is, it's the outside of your ankle. I'd had tendonitis off and on. I was wearing a boot at the Parkinson's walk. We started talking about your plantar fasciitis. And so here's our shameless plug, our unpaid endorsement. You sent me to the Good Feet store.
I did.
And I was very skeptical. I was desperate, though, because of this retreat that was coming up that you're going to hear about in a couple of minutes. I knew I was going to be on my feet. And so I went in, I tried it out. And when they fit me it's not custom made, but they're custom fit for those people who don't know. And when they fit me with the right ones, I just was like, all the pressure was off my tendon. And I was like, okay, I need these. I need those. You owe me some money, by the way, Tim. But other than that,
why do I owe you money?
No, you're good. The HSA covered it. I hope other people heard that too. So it really mattered. I've been out of the fracture boot every second since I got my Good Feet store inserts. So there it is.
So now I'm watching the Twins games, and they keep saying, Carlos Correa's been out with plantar fasciitis. And I used to, back in the day, I could go down there and get right to him. And now I'm like, Carlos, go to the Good Feet store. You will walk out of there. You will never miss another game. So that is our shameless plug for a store that they're not a sponsor, but I just had to bring that up because I've never given a doctor advice before and they help them. So I had to do that.
It was fabulous. I call them my magic feet. So when I'm talking about my magic feet, that's what I'm talking about.
And you know about chronic pain. I mean, and that's what you were
Yeah.
dealing with.
Right.
Yeah. So let's get on to the Parkinson's part of this, because you just returned from a retreat on Parkinson's where you, despite your 20 years of experience, were both a student and a teacher. Where were you and what was going on?
I was at something called the Power Retreat. Now, Power is spelled PWR. It stands for Parkinson Wellness Recovery. And we get to put links under this, right? We got to put PWR, the number 4, life.org for our listeners as that resource. But I'm going to tell you a story. In order to understand it, you have to know the background, because some of this ties into one of your previous podcasts. So I'll start with a story. Once upon a time, a very energetic and brilliant researcher named Dr. Becky Farley, who's a PT, but she also has a PhD in neuroscience. She was starting to gain an interest in Parkinson's, and there was something called Lee Silverman voice training, loud, that was working well for people with Parkinson's with their voices. And she pondered, could this same concept work for movement? And she invented LSVT Big, which I know you've chatted with Jen Tacito about, which is a fabulous, very well-researched program that helps people with Parkinson's learn how to move bigger, right? Because Parkinson's makes us move smaller. Over time, Becky wanted to evolve the moves into movements that would be more versatile for exercise classes and for functional activities. And she spent 3 years developing what she now calls the Power Moves. And the Power Moves company was born. And so the research on the Power Moves is a little slower coming out because it was slower in development. But obviously, it's a fantastic program that fights patterns of Parkinson's disease. And once a year, the Power Moves Gym, or the Power Gym, which is based in Tucson, Arizona, puts on a week-long retreat. 7 days, 6 nights of exercise. They use the 3 E's: education, exercise, enrichment, and empowerment, where people with Parkinson's disease can bring a care partner if they want to. About half the people do. And it's 3 hours of exercise in the morning, and it's 2 to 3 hours of education in the afternoon, and it's socialization. And one night there's a dance and an atmosphere, Tim, to describe it, it is almost beyond my vocabulary. There's just no stigma at all present. It's almost kind of the opposite. Like you only really want to pay attention to the people who are there for their Parkinson's. But some of the adjectives I did jot down, I've got some notes over here, that the participants themselves were using when I was leaving: touchstone of my life, life-changing, fun and achievement, community building, supportive, fear-busting. It goes on. And I just got the group of people that work at the Power Gym that have been putting this together. I think this is their 13th year. Forgive me, I'm close. They put their hearts and souls into it, and it is absolutely so inspiring. I learned so much from the instructors. I learned so much from the people there with Parkinson. Even though I was there as a volunteer to help instruct. Yeah. So why was I there? I was there as a volunteer to help instruct the classes. There were 8 of us volunteers. We all had to be certified in Power Moves before we could be selected and go. But being immersed in it like that, we learned so much more. I'm going to be a better therapist. I'm going to be better at teaching my exercise classes because I had the incredible privilege of being able to go to this retreat. I'm just full of gratitude. This might be the first time I've talked about it without getting emotional about it. It's just was such a wonderful thing. And I took over 20 steps a day in my magic feet, and I felt fine.
There we go. It all ties in. So what do you do now with this? You're at this 7-day immersive experience, and you take that information and you do what?
I use Power Moves more functionally during my physical therapy treatments. I know that I'm going to just make more videos of patients. Sometimes it's, we work on them in our therapy session, but I don't always send them home with enough the Power Moves because maybe I don't have pictures of them. But people have devices. They have their phones. I can use their phone. I can take a video of them, and they can go home with that much better of an exercise program. I learned how to flow the movements together better. I just learned how to do them better, teach them in a class. Because part of what I do at Struthers is I do teach a couple of exercise classes a week. And I'm also just going to be a better advocate because we're not back to our pre-COVID levels yet of exercise classes. And I'm just going to be banging the table. So that's to get more frequency. So that's a warning to anyone I work with. They agree with me, though. They agree with me.
Here she comes.
Here she comes.
I said at the top that we could spend most of the half hour just talking about the road you traveled in your medical career and your work with PD. But I learned that you have a personal connection, that you had what you call a branch of this disease that hit very close to home for you at an early age. Can you talk about that?
Well, it was 2015. I lost my mom to something called Lewy body dementia. Now, a lot of people have heard of that, but they may not realize that that is a branch of the Parkinson's tree. My mom initially was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, but which did not turn out to be a correct diagnosis. And in fact, the diagnostic criteria for it has changed in 2017. And so that was quite a bit before she was diagnosed. But Lewy body and Parkinson's disease are the exact same biological disease in the brain, but they take place in different parts of the brain. So the Lewy bodies are little globs of goo. It's a misfolded alpha-synuclein protein that the neurons, the cells don't know how to get rid of. And so they end up with these little dumpster fires in the neurons, and the neurons just can't function efficiently. They still function, they just don't function as efficiently. So when that disease process starts in the back of the brain, it affects movement. Then it's Parkinson's disease. When it starts more in the front of the brain, it affects more your cognition and language, and then it's called Lewy body. Really, the defining diagnostic is 1 year. If you have motor symptoms or movement symptoms a year before you have any cognitive symptoms, it's Parkinson's. If the cognitive starts 1 year before the physical, it's called Lewy body. And so she did have some physical symptoms. She had some Parkinsonian symptoms the last year or so of her life. And so if I knew then what I know now, right? I was inspired. I just couldn't be ignorant about it anymore. So I really, her life and what she went through inspired me to want to pursue this. And I've always had an interest in neurology. I used to be more stroke focused, and I was inspired to be. And then I had the privilege of getting this job at Struthers, and I just wonder if she didn't have a role in that. So, yeah, that's my story about my mom.
They say there are no coincidences. And I think it's beautiful that you've dedicated your life in this way, and think of the many people that you've been able to help as a result of that.
I hope so.
That's a nice story. All right. Because of the breadth of your experience in this area, there are a lot of ways we could take this conversation. And I am going to limit you because we try to keep this as something you can do in a car ride or in a walk. So I want to leave the direction of the conversation up to our guests. And I haven't got an answer to this. I sent this to you, and I don't know the answer to this yet. So where do you want to take the focus of this edition?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I answered you. I do.
That's okay.
You have done such a good job in this podcast of bringing out these wonderful stories and these inspiring stories, and people with Parkinson's and the things that people are doing in the Parkinson's community, the PT who's the travel agent. And I mean, just all these great things your listeners know. I guess my genetic code, is a bit of an educator. And I wanted to just back up and talk about some definitions. I wanted to talk about what is a movement disorder and what is Parkinson's disease dementia / Lewy body, and what isn't it? And why is it important to be addressing those symptoms, particularly my lens as a physical therapy lens. So I would like to sneak through some definitions, if that's all right with you.
Let's do that. So what is a movement disorder?
A movement disorder is a reduction in the brain's ability to tell the body what to do consistently and how to do it the way it always has. So what is it not? a lot of times, one of the reasons I like being an educator, Tim, is because it helps reduce fear. Sometimes people come in and say, I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. Am I just going to wake up tomorrow and be paralyzed? No. A movement disorder is not paralysis. It's a change in your ability to control your body. It's not a brain tumor that's just going to rapidly progress and be completely unpredictable and not necessarily respond to medication. Typically, and we're going to talk specifically about Parkinson's, right? Because obviously that's the podcast, but I just want to say, I'm talking about movement disorders. 85% of the movement disorder population has Parkinson's disease. So that other 15%, there's certainly other movement disorders that are worthy of attention. I'm just not going to pay as much attention to those today, but there are several that do have similar symptoms. So it's still relevant for the progressive supranuclear palsy folks and the multisystem atrophy folks and the corticobasal degeneration folks that make up a chunk of those, that 15%. So it's a slowing, right? It's a slowing of the brain. It's not Alzheimer's disease. It's not a forgetting. We call it a non-amnestic. You've heard the word amnesia, means you forget. You don't forget when you have a Parkinson's or a Lewy body slowing of the brain. It's all still in there. It just takes a little longer. It just takes a little longer to get out. And usually Parkinson's and Lewy body respond well to medication. Typically, if people can't tolerate medication, it can be an individualized side effect. It's like any medication, but most of the time, we've got some really good tools to manage these things. And when people really get their heads around that, suddenly it just becomes a little bit easier to cope with that. So, what does it take then when your brain can't just automatically do things? We kind of call that the autopilot. So every morning you get up out of bed, you roll to your side and you sit on up and then you stand on up and you don't
even think about it. You just do it.
Right? You're on autopilot. Right. Your hands
Mm-hmm.
know where the light switches are or how to put the key in your car. Do people still do that?
Sure.
I do. And so what ultimately, and I'll get to this a little more, is we try to take that unconscious or that autopilot and we move it more to the cognitive part of the brain. And suddenly we have the ability then to treat these symptoms. So my theme here, hopefully people will catch up on, is treatable condition, manageable condition in terms of symptoms. So people will come in and they'll say, oh, I saw some words in my chart. People access their medical charts online, or they go to Dr. Google and they say, I have hypokinesia and I have bradykinesia. And well, let's just talk about what that means, because you already know what you have. When I tell people what that means, they're like, oh, I knew that. Hypokinesia, small movements. Kinesia means movement. Hypo just means less than. Brady means slow. Kinesia means movement, means slower movement. Oh, well, you already know that too. And so they're kind of big things characterized. You go into the neurologist, they have you do this. They're looking how fast can you move and how big are your movements. We're looking for those cardinal signs of Parkinson's disease. So just making those words less scary. Also, dystonia or rigidity. One of the things that happens when you have low dopamine is your brain has a harder time. It's actually a disease of relaxation. It has a harder time telling your muscles how to relax. And so you get tight, you get more rigid. You have and for some people it's more extreme and they actually get dystonias. Again, there's tools in the toolbox for that. But just knowing what that means, I think is helpful. And it's helpful for us non-Parkies to see it, right? And we're going to be talking about that a little bit toward the end. So third term I really want to hit on is neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity, Neuro, means the brain's ability to change. Plasticity means it's changeable, it's malleable. And how do you change the brain? So if you're trying to make things work on this autopilot's not working, and we're trying to make things more cognitive, we'll get into this a little more detail, but ultimately, if you want to make the bigger movements more automatic, there's one way to do it. And it just makes me think I give George Carlin credit for this joke, but I don't know if it's his joke. He stops a cabbie in New York City and he says, "How do you get to Carnegie Hall?" And the cabbie says, "Practice, man, practice," right? So
Yep.
we can take the conscious mind, practice big movements, and recalibrate that autopilot so that your movements do become bigger with less thought. But you do have to keep after it because we know it's a progressive disease. But the reason I bring up neuroplasticity is because what we know about Parkinson's disease, and I learned this from Colin McKinnon. He's the director of the movement disorders lab at the University of Minnesota. I know I'm not the first person to talk about him.
No, but he's the guy. He's the great escape artist. He'll never come on this podcast, but everybody comes on and talks about him. So if you know the man, get on him. I'm sorry.
Right.
Go ahead.
All right. No worries. I got to hear him speak, and he was talking about how they wanted to kind of see, when does this opportunity of neuroplasticity, does it start to close in Parkinson's, in advanced Parkinson's? And what they learned, maybe it's not his study, but he told me about it, is that it actually gets bigger first. And so the brain, even before diagnosis, is trying to figure out, how do I do this? I'm trying to change things. Something's not working, which is part of the reason that 60-70% of your dopamine is gone before you even have a symptom, because your brain has been compensating and figuring this out without you even knowing. And so early intervention, early physical therapy is so important, because we want to get that window of time where we can really make the biggest changes. So that's one of my big plugs for early physical therapy, because we really have the research backing that up. So exercise is medicine.
So if I can put the brakes on you just a moment on that, then. So let's talk about this. So someone's listening to this, and they've got it. They're into their journey. So if take me for example, if I was to all of a sudden get diagnosed with this, what would you want of me? What would you hope that I would do? What should the average person say? Say someone has just been recently diagnosed and they're trying to come to terms with this. They've tripped across this podcast and they're out there listening. Your words to them as a newly diagnosed Parky are what?
Well, Tim, you're sneaking ahead into my call to action for Parkies.
Oh, shoot.
2 things. Rose Wickman,
this is your CTA.
Okay, but I have 2. I have one for Parkies, one for non-Parkies.
Okay.
For Parkies, get yourself a team, right? Rose Wickman, that when she was on, big deal. We know people who have a multidisciplinary team surrounding them do better. We know this. Then you know who to call. You don't have to be stressed. You don't have to be afraid. You have a new symptom, because it's whack-a-mole, right? There's motor symptoms, there's non-motor symptoms, right? There's constipation, there's all kinds of things that go on when you have Parkinson's. And when you have a team, you know who to call. Now your stress way down. So second thing, Parkies, get to a physical therapist. Even if you're an exerciser, you've had a lot of fantastic, inspiring people on here. Most people aren't going to be able to train for an Ironman in 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Wow. Get to a physical therapist, a movement disorder specialist physical therapist. I'm going to give you an example. Please. So I have a patient who, she was diagnosed 3 years ago. She's $1 million. She does yoga a couple times a week. She does boxing for Parkinson's 3 times a week. She does pedaling for Parkinson's a couple times a week. And she walks 2 to 4 miles. But I was tired just listening to her exercise program. I checked her gait speed and her stride length. Very, very important measures in Parkinson's. There's the creep of the small stride. We work on that. But she was doing great. She'd been working on that. And so then I tested her turns, right? Turn to the left and turn to the right. She's stumbling. She said, I've been noticing that lately. I've been stumbling. So I'm looking at it with my PT eyes, and I can see where she's not weight shifting correctly. I can see where her autopilot is failing her. So we broke it down so that she understood it. We changed it. I gave her very simple patterning exercise. It's not a vigorous exercise at all. It's just patterning. You got to do this every day. Pattern your brain to weight shift correctly so that you can turn without stumbling. Right? If we hadn't done that part of the test, all of a sudden she's going to have more and more trouble turning, or she's going to be freezing in her kitchen, freezing her gate in her kitchen, or whatever. And so we got on top of it. We did one session. She's out the door, and now she's $2 million.
That's fabulous. Okay, now we are almost 25 minutes in, so we're at the end already. How fast has that gone?
Really fast.
I know. So this is the way it works. You'll be back. I promise you, we'll be back. So I'm going to do a kind of a two-parter, okay? This is how we'll wrap this up, but we're going to try to keep this both questions under 4 minutes cumulatively. You've been obviously working as a physical therapist for a long time. First, in your experience, where have you seen the greatest amount of progress?
Exercise as medicine. We know it works. Even 15 years ago, we weren't so sure. I love working in a profession that I know is the best medicine. It's the best medicine for Parkinson's. And I get to do that. I get to give people education. I get to give people hope. It's my tools that are helping people get better. How fun is that? I mean, that
Beautiful.
progress is so, and to be able then to have a platform like Struthers where I can use them and really have that springboard and that voice that they have given me, and be able to just not just exercise, but strategies. I always say it's not just the what, it's the how. You have to learn how to move, not just to move, so that you're fighting your own patterns. And to be able to do that every day and have people change and say, wow, I was a guy a couple weeks ago, he was freezing. He couldn't walk more than 20 feet without freezing. We changed a couple of things. We got a new device. Now he's working on his walking tolerance over 5 minutes without freezing. Being able to do things like that and have that, and have the knowledge that that is really, really helping people. Huge progress.
Okay, let's flip that coin. Where do you still see an area that either continues to frustrate you, or where you see the potential for progress, but we're just not quite there yet?
Yeah, I'll be quick. Number one, nutrition. We have terrible nutrition in this country. It's a society problem. We're still eating things that inflame our brains, and we need to figure out how to make it cheap to not do that. Number two, too many docs and neurologists not prescribing PT. Please prescribe PT early and often, at least once a year, at least. Hardest thing, I think, is how many people are not served. Underserved populations, people who don't know where to go, people who don't know how to get there, people who don't have a care partner in their life, or transportation to a clinic, just access resources. That part that's really tough. We wish we could reach more people, right? And then one more thing, sleep. I told you we could do another show entirely on sleep. Educated a lot by my sister, the dentist. And we're just not crossing over enough between what the dentists are learning about sleep and what the medical knowledge is. I just really believe there's a preventative key component in there somewhere. We just got to figure that out.
As a guy who used to wake up in the middle of the night for many, many years to go to work, and then, my sleep was always interrupted, had way too many sleep experts come on that program and say, yeah, you really shouldn't be doing what you're doing. And there's going to be a price to be paid for that later in life. So I live in fear of that one. Dr. Adix, I want to thank you so much, not only just for joining us here today, but for the work that you have done and continue to do to serve this community. I just really can't say enough about it. I wish you nothing but continued success. Continue to fight the good fight, and please do not be a stranger. And so I'm going to put the onus on you. Now that you've been here and we have had this initial discussion, you and I know there's plenty still to be disseminated here. So when you have something, you know where to find me, and I will put you back in the queue, and you will be back.
I know we're going over, but my second call to action for non-Parkies, real quick. Start seeing Parkinson's. The people in your life who have Parkinson's have hypokinesia and bradykinesia, their face, their voice. It takes them longer to respond, and they have less facial expression. They have a softer voice. Don't leave them out of your life. They're in there, they're responding. It just takes their motor system longer. We had the bumper stickers, start seeing motorcycles. It worked. start seeing Parkinson's, and let's eliminate the stigma. They don't deserve it.
I spent so much time fighting this in the beginning when I kept saying, I don't understand why there's this stigma. You didn't do anything. You didn't share needles. You didn't have unsafe sex. This wasn't how you got this. You just genetically had bad luck. And through the time, I've come to understand where that whole stigma thing comes from, and it's real. And I appreciate you bringing that. And we need to have some sort of a public awareness campaign so, the rest of us can better understand what they were going through and to support them. So here she is, Dr. Annie Adix. She is a senior physical therapist at Struthers Parkinson's Center, a specialist in the treatment of Parkinson's disease and other movement disorders at Struthers. You do incredible work. They all do there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. And we will talk again soon. Now, I'm going to take you out of the flow here. Don't go anywhere, okay? I'll be back with you in just a minute. All right. As you may or may not remember, the Parkinson's Project seeks to be a place where you can come for a range of information about PD and to find support for yourself or for perhaps a loved one. We encourage you to please check us out on Facebook at the Parkinson's Project, and you can find the Parkinson's Project podcast wherever you find your favorite podcasts. We ask you to check us out and to rate us so we can continue to give support in the ongoing effort to eradicate this affliction and once and for all put ourselves out of business. For executive producer Pat Porcia, I am Tim McNiff. I want to thank you for joining us. We look forward to meeting you and working with all of you as we seek to build a loving, supportive, and empowering community through all aspects of the Parkinson's Project.
Thank you for engaging with the Parkinson's Project podcast. Be sure to look for more content on the Parkinson's Project Facebook page, and we'll see you right here on the next edition of the Parkinson's Project podcast.